aghast at the sight of bronze fingers latched onto his. Rafe yanked his arm back, only to have the grip tighten and trap him. He tried again, but the more he pulled, the more those fingers squeezed. Fearing he might end up with a crushed hand, he relented. "What do you want?" he gasped at the figure. The bronze grip grew warmer, the metal growing strangely softer. He gulped and searched around. He stared at the door through which he had hoped to escape. It looked an impossible distance away, especially anchored down by a bronze statue. Still, he knew it wouldn't be long before the gongs of discovery would be ringing. He had to be gone before they let loose the pack of thylosaurs. "Let go," he pleaded. "I have to escape." With a wince, he tugged again, expecting a crush of bone, but the grip remained the same, only the response was much worse. "Hey, what's up? It's Fairtrade ASMR, and today we're reading Chapter 7 of The Starless Crown by James Rollins. So let's get right into it. The bronze figure stirred on the cart, the waist bent, lifting her upright. Though it took 2 attempts, requiring her to prop up her other arm under her, the head rolled atop its shoulder, as if stretching a kink, and the drape of filamentous hairs shivered, falling loose like any woman's coif. Then eyes, framed by long, delicate lashes, opened. He cringed back, expecting to see the fires of damnation, but instead he found eyes not unlike his own staring back at him, only glassier, with pupils of azure blue that seemed to glow faintly. Though the last could be his panicked imagination, that gaze found him, flicking from his trapped hand to his face, her head cocked in plain curiosity, her lips parted, showing a glimpse of bone-white teeth. Her other hand rose and touched those lips, her bronze brow wrinkling as if sculpted of tanned flesh. Rafe noted the fingers that clasped him felt soft and warm. What manner of demon has animated this statue? As much as he should be horrified, he could not look away as she continued to wake. Had she been feigning earlier, perhaps sensing the ill intent of those gathered around her? He knew many of the beasts that would pretend to be dead to ward off predators. Or had she simply been building her strength, stoking the alchemies into a mightier fire to rouse her fully? He could not know. But deep down he suspected her stirring was meant for him alone. Her eyes continued to stare at him as if appraising him. And she did. Her hand shifted from her lips and gently combed fingers through her bronze locks, which had taken on a darker sheen as if tarnished. Then, with an arch of her back, which lifted her small breasts higher, she swung her legs from the cart to the floor. He backed to the length of their 2 joined arms. She stood shakily at first. He stared down at her toes, inscribed with fine nails. She began to lose her balance, teetering and leaning towards him. He tried to steady her, but her weight came close to dropping him to his knees. Despite her animated appearance, she remained as heavy as a statue. Still, he caught her arm with his free hand and helped keep her upright. It took all the strength in his legs and back. "I got you," he whispered. She finally straightened, finding her ease. He studied her countenance. Ages ago, he had visited the holy cathedral in Anvil. Adorning its main nave, a towering stained glass window displayed the pantheon of gods, while the mother below had been depicted with a loving expression. The daughter's face was as harsh as the glass, resolute and unforgiving. She carried a bow in hand and a quiver of arrows across her back. She was also sometimes called the Huntress. Rafe stared at the bronze figure, naked and unashamed. From visage to shape, it was as if the daughter herself had been given a form on earth. As wondrous as this all was, Rafe recognized the press of time. He swallowed and tried again. "I must go." He headed towards a small door at the rear of the chamber, while trying to free his hand. She refused to let go. Instead, she followed his steps, keeping abreast of him. Rafe exhaled in relief. "Good enough for now," he continued across the chamber, fearing she might stop at any moment and anchor him in place again. He sensed he needed to keep her moving, like a boulder rolling down a hill. Still, he did not hurry, lest she lose her balance. As he led her, his gaze swept the room. Her gaze swept the room, her face hard and unreadable. He reached the door and found it unlocked. He hauled it open and got them both through into a small anteroom. The reek of blood and bowel stuck his nose. Even the bronze woman recoiled. To the left was a stone table with shackles. Blood pooled around it. On the floor, as if tossed aside, was a square of bone, flesh, and skin. Rafe pictured the poor girl, the blood-barren sacrifice. The bronze woman stepped towards the bloody remains, but Rafe restrained her, or, considering how much she weighed, at least discouraged her. "No, there's nothing we can do." A glance to the other side revealed a pile of discarded clothes, worn leather sandals, a shapeless beige shift, an overcloak that looked more patches than cloth. "Must have belonged to the sacrifice girl." Rafe urged the bronze woman over to the pile. "You need to dress. Can't have you traipsing around, bare arse to the world." He certainly couldn't sneak off with a walking bronze statue next to him. She cocked her head, her expression quizzical. "God's woman, must I do everything?" He pantomimed with one hand, and with some guidance, he got the shift over her head. Slowly, she grew to understand his intent. She let go of his hand long enough to drape the dress to her knees. Then she bent down to the cloak and frowned a moment. Before he could tell her anything, she began to don it. Sandals too, he warned. No one went barefoot in the territories, not across the ember-hot sands that could blister a soul in 2 steps. It was one of the reasons the overseers kept the prisoners shoeless, all the better to keep them from running. He stared over at the woman. While he didn't know if such bronze could be damaged by the heat, the oddity of a woman strolling without protection across the scorch would draw unwanted attention. Then Rafe finally realized the truth. He looked down at his empty hands. "I'm free." He glanced to the tunnel that exited the antechamber. He stepped in that direction as a woman struggled with the overcloak. If he ran now, he might get away. Escaping unseen would be far easier without such a mystery in tow. Still, he closed his eyes with an exasperated sigh, knowing he must stay. "You're such a swink." He opened his eyes and turned to her. As she managed to secure the overcloak, he crossed over and pulled the cloak's hood over her head, doing his best to hide her unnaturalness. He stared into her eyes, which in the shadows of the hood did indeed glow faintly. Her expression, like her bronze form, softened. An arm rose. He expected her to grip him again, but she only passed the back of her hand across his cheek. The warmth melted into him. Then she lowered her arm and bent down to the discarded sandals. He helped her don them, and then gave her a final inspection. He eyed her up and down as she stood. "As long as no one looks too closely," he muttered, then silently added, "What am I thinking?" He shrugged and headed towards the tunnel. He reached it just as a distant ringing echoed. With each breath, it grew louder, spreading through the mine. The gongs. He glanced back to the bronze countenance. "We're too late." Rafe gave no heed to caution. He had no time for a studious assessment of his route. He simply ran, only checking every now and then to see if the woman followed him. She kept pace. Her eyes glowed back at him from the shadows of her cloak's hood. He read no panic in her gaze, which greatly irritated him. "Gods be, I should already be gone." The clanging of gongs. Dong, 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 chased him down the tunnel. He stuck to what appeared to be the main passageway. Side tunnels cut away, but they appeared smaller, more likely to winnow away to dead ends. Other chambers stood open, or were barred shut. He ignored them all, though he was thief enough to wonder what treasures might be buried down in these shriven halls. The only promising sign was that the glassy black rock returned to white chalk, veined with dark brimstone. He also felt the tunnel steadily rising. The pressure in his ears eased with every 100 steps. The air turned drier with each panted breath. Finally, the passageway leveled out and ran straight for some distance. Hoping for the best, he fled faster. He found the end of the tunnel sealed with a door. He ran up to it, his heart choking him with its hammering. He feared the overseers had already locked this way down. They would all of the exits from the mine. Once the gong sounded, still he prayed he was in time. He reached for the door and tried the latch, it would not give. He fought it some more, but to no avail. Already barred. He leaned his head against the studded wood, accepting his cursed fate. Then a hand shoved him aside. The bronze woman placed both palms against the door and pinioned her legs behind her. She braced her limbs, put her shoulder against the frame, and strained harder. Her feet ripped clean out of the leather sandals and dug into the chalk, gouging deep. Rafe backed away. Gods be! Metal groaned. Whether door or woman, he could not say. Then came a booming splintering, and the door crashed open. Sunlight blasted into the dark tunnel. Rafe lifted a forearm against it, but was still blinded. He stumbled out of the tunnel. Hurry, he urged the women who had freed him. They were far from safe. As he hobbled into the open, he blinked away the glare, needing to get his bearings. Shouts rang out all around. The braying of oxen rose to the right. The pounding of raw ore under hammers was everywhere. Not far off, sifters and washers sang brightly as their slurries and cribbles. Within a few steps, Rafe's sight returned to reveal the chaos topside. Past the mine's many pit mouths, a whole village spread, a mix of tents, wooden stables, smithies, foundries, and whorehouses were all set amidst the towering hills of the mine tailings and waste gob. Ox-driven wagons worked their way through the maze of roads, and the paths long ago rutted into the stone by the passing centuries. All about men and women labored. Pumpmen, smelters, sorters, carpenters. Others straddled horses or rode hardy Angloria pock ponies, a rare sight so far east and said to be worth their weight in silver. Rafe glanced behind him to the open door and shattered wood. The entrance was well to the side of the village, far from the nearest pit mouth. No one seemed to have noticed their arrival or heard the splintering blast. Clearly, this entrance was meant to be far from prying eyes. All the better. This way, he urged his companion. He set off on a path to skirt around the village of chalk. He wanted to keep those hills barren. He wanted to keep those hills of barren ore between him and any eyes looking this way. He hurried, but did his best not to look rushed or suspicious. He had a goal in mind and intended to reach it. To his side, the woman showed, her face craned to the cloud-scudded sky and the blaze of sun. She finally stopped, lifting her palms to the same. He stepped back to her and scolded her. No time for gaping about. She ignored him, standing still, seemingly returned to a statue. He was all ready to abandon her, but she had broken him out of the mine. He had also noticed that the shade of her bronze face had lightened under the sun. Same with her palms, as if the sunlight were polishing her brighter. Or maybe it was the Father blessing her, imbuing her with his vital essence. Then, in the distance, he heard a familiar howl. He stiffened and ducked. Thylosaurs. He searched back towards the village, squinting at the main pit mouth. He saw a pair of overseers, each lead a trio of leashed thylosaurs, Anyone near fled backwards, opening the sight farther. The overseers unshackled 2 of their oil-furred charges, keeping a hold of the 3rd. The released pair shot out into the village. Each was 1/4 of the height of a horse and twice as long. Their sinuous, striped bodies snaked through the tents and structures. Their long tails swept the path behind them, casting a musk that wiped away all other scents except one: blood. One, then another arched onto their hind limbs. Nostrils were shoved high, flaring with a pink star of fleshy, sensitive feelers. They waggled the air, testing scents. A howl followed, then another, and another. Rafe knew what that meant. The beasts had caught a whiff of their prey. He reached over and grabbed a fistful of the bronze woman's cloak. He tugged hard. "Enough! We must go!" Her face turned from the skies. Her gaze found him, and she gave the barest nod. Together, the 2 set off across the sand and rock. Rafe led the way around a hillock of waste ore, pounded and sifted of anything of value ages ago. The howls of the thylosaur pursued them, sounding to his ear as if they were drawing even closer. He searched ahead as they rounded the mountain of broken rock, his ears strained, listening for any warning. "Please don't have left already." As he continued, a faint singing wafted over to him from ahead, easily carried across the desert plains that stretched all the way to the horizons. Then he heard the heavy grind of iron wheels. No, no, no! He increased his pace, though it was likely already futile. He finally rounded the hill, and a wide sandy stretch opened. Ahead, some 1/4 reach away, stretched a chained caravan, 12 iron-strapped wooden wagons, each filled to the top with brimstone, chalk, and other metalliferous rock. It sat atop a huge iron wheels fixed into steel rails. The tracks started in the salt mines far to the south and stretched 100 leagues north, all the way to Anvil. With the day ended, the caravan would make the long sojourn to the trading port, returning the next morning to be filled again. Rafe watched the caravan roll along the outskirts of Chalk. At the front, a pair of giant sand crabs flanked the tracks, tethered by chains to the lead of the caravan. The black, armored beasts were twice the size of the wagons they pulled. The creatures' 8-jointed legs ended in spikes that dug into sand and rock. The front pair normally bore scythe-like claws, but those pincers had been clipped long ago, when the crabs had been captured in the broken wastes of the deep desert. The 2 beasts dragged the 12 wains of the caravan behind them. When truly moving, they could outrun the fastest horse across the desert, but for now, the pair started slow, fighting the stubborn wagons from their standstill. It would not take long before that changed. Seated on the front wagon, the pair's driver, who had been bonded to them long ago, sang them into motion, encouraging them, coaxing them. Unlike the imprisoned miners, they required no whips or cudgels to get them moving. Instead, the lilting strands of the driver's song penetrated their armor and played across their brains. Rafe did not understand, and he was and wagered few did. Such a talent was rare, and growing even rarer. Such drivers could command a steep price for their service. Despite the futility, Rafe chased after the moving caravan. Maybe it might stop. Maybe a load needed to be shifted and balanced better. But more than anything, he ran as more howls rose along the trail behind him. He dare not even look over his shoulder as he cleared the hillock and raced across the open sand. Instead of slowing, the line of the caravan was gaining speed. Still, he ran. Then movement drew his eyes to the right. A lone thylosaur rounded the far side of the rock mound and raced to ambush him. Its sinuous form ran low, arrowing straight at him. From its frothing muzzle, a glint of fangs showed. It would not kill him. That would be too kind of an end. Instead, the thylosaurs have been trained to bring down an escaped prisoner, often ripping the back tendons of their legs. From there, it was straight to the spikes for such a crime, where death would come much more slowly. Many died not from the impalement, but from the flocks of carrion birds and blister ants scavenging on them, picking them apart with razor-sharp beaks and fiery jaws. All while the sufferer screamed and writhed in agony. Despite the threat, Rafe found his legs slowing, too exhausted and weak after so much time in the mines. Even the terror-stoked fires eventually sputtered out and died. Then a hard blow struck him across the back and knocked him forward. Thylosaur. He sprawled headfirst into the sand, expecting to feel teeth rip into flesh. Instead, an arm hooked around his waist and kept him upright. It hadn't been a thylosaur attacking him. He turned to the bronze woman. She hiked him up. Only his toes still touched, dragging across the sand. "What are you?" Then she sped faster, her legs pounding, her toes digging deep. She fled across the sand like a storm-blown dust whip across the desert. He found his legs trying to match her pace, his feet squabbling uselessly as the ground flew underfoot. She sped past the lone thylosaur, who tried to give chase, but was swiftly left in the breath of her dust. It howled in frustration after them, echoed by the others. Ahead, the last wagon of the caravan grew before them. She chased after it, but even her considerable pace was not enough. With the last wagon only a few dozen steps away, the caravan gained more speed. The wain began to pull away. So close. Then Rafe's stomach lurched as she leaped high, bounding like a desert hare from the poisonous strike of an adder. She sailed across the last of the distance and hit the wagon's rear with a jolting impact. He would have been knocked loose, if not for her kidney-bruising grip. Her other hand latched onto the wagon's top frame. She did her best to push him upwards, almost dropping him, but he caught hold and scurried onto the wagon. Once atop the ore pile, he sprawled on his back, spent and exhausted, oblivious to the shards poking and cutting. He didn't care. Right now, it was the most comfortable bed in the world. She climbed up and settled next to him on her knees. She cast her gaze back towards chalk. "It's all right, lass," he gasped. "They can't catch us now." He didn't even bother looking for any sign of pursuit. He felt the trundling wheels of the caravan roll ever faster. Few creatures were faster than a sand crab. They could even outrace a sky crow, At such speeds, the caravan would reach Anvil before any message could be sent, and once there, he would quickly lose himself in the tumult and chaos of the port, maybe even take a ship abroad if need be. "We're safe," he sighed out, assuring the woman and himself. He patted her thigh again, the strange pliancy of her bronze, as if it were merely tanned flesh. She ignored him, her gaze aimed skyward, but not towards the sun. She stared towards the low horizon, where a half moon sat. He remembered his earlier assessment of her, how her countenance reminded him of the huntress. Both the dark daughter and the silvery sun made their home in the moon. It was said the two were continually chased one another round and round, leading to the moon's waxing and waning, but such a chase remained a great philosophical argument. Did the daughter pursue the sun, or was it the other way around? Wars have been fought over such a religious quandary, but at this moment, he couldn't care less. "I'm free." He laughed up at the sky. It seemed impossible. Joy swelled through him, calming his hammering heart and breathless panting. He finally sat up, stared as the caravan crossed the sea of black glass, where the sands had been fused by some fiery cataclysm. The reflection of the sun off its surface was blinding. At the same time, the day's heat grew steadily. He searched around him. They needed to get out of the direct sun, or at least he did. He considered how best to dig a shelter in the broken rock. "Seems my mining duties are not over yet." Despite the burn of the sun, he returned his attention to the mystery kneeling beside him. What exactly had he stolen from the Shriverin? What manner of spirit was trapped in that bronze? He recalled the arch-sheriff mentioning a coming war, how such a creature could turn the tide. Rafe now understood. An army led by such a miracle, or, for that matter, a legion of the same, would be unstoppable. Still, he sensed, such an abuse of her would be wrong. It was not in her nature. He tried to read her face as she stared at the moon. Her features were now sculpted in the expression of sorrow, as if mourning a great loss. He reached again to her, then lowered his arm. He owed her, this spirit who had brought him freedom, who had saved his life. He wanted to ask her how he could repay such a debt, but he feared she could not speak. Or maybe she simply needed more time to fully settle her spirit into the bronze. Either way, there was nothing he could say. In their shared silence, she continued to look at the moon. As the caravan continued its course north, Rafe settled back. A lethargy spread through him after the day's many terrors. He listened to the driver's song trailing back to them, to the steady rumble of wheels. He knew he should get started on that shelter, but his eyelids grew heavy, drooped, and closed. After a time, a low moan rose from beside him, stirring him back awake. He turned and looked to the woman, her gaze still on the horizon. He could not say if the sound was a mournful exhalation or her first attempt to speak. Still, Rafe's skin pebbled with cold bumps. Her lips parted again, and the sound firmed around a single word, whispered to the moon. Doom. onto